After just heard Professor Gu's talk, I got very inspired, and I find it could learn so much from his experience to publish a great journal. Today, I'm gonna spend the first 20 minutes to briefly introduce my recent published work, and the 10 minutes to share my experience during this process. So today, good morning and good afternoon. Today, I'm going to talk about the Amazon forest biogeography, predict the resilience and the vulnerability to drought. How important are the forests for the climate change? And we know that there are significant mutual interactions between the forest and the climate. For example, the forest impacts on the atmosphere through water vapor, clouds, aerosols, and circulations. And in return, the atmosphere also impacts on the forest through the seasonality, forest transitions, or extreme weather events. Critically, is we want to know how the ecological, atmospheric, and hydrological dynamics work in the ecosystem. And here I'm going to talk about the Amazon forest. And what's your first impression about the Amazon forest? Maybe you think about its huge biodiversity, very complex canopy structures with multi-layers, or the Amazon forest acts as the largest carbon sink in the world. Or you may also think about its widespread river systems. But right now, the Amazon forest is facing serious threats under the climate change, like the increased temperature, frequent droughts, wildfires, deforestation, or degradation caused by human activities. The question is, will the Amazon forest keep resilient under the climate change, or the Amazon forest will pass a tipping point towards collapse because of the future climate change stress? And critically is we want to understand the forest ecosystem to respond to the drought. And the fundamental question here is, one of the key aspects of the carbon cycle is to quantify the photosynthesis and to predict the photosynthesis response to the climate change. And the tropical area is the key region that we study the photosynthesis, the carbon cycle. And this figure shows, there are different, this figure shows different estimate of the annual photosynthesis across different latitudes. And you might see the magnitude and the uncertainty are the largest in the tropics. So what drives the Amazon forest response to the multiple droughts become the critical question to understand the photosynthesis and to predict its response. My main methodology here is using the biogeography. It's a key example of the biological scaling. And this is the picture proposed by the Alexander von Humboldt, who is the father of the biogeography. And he depicted this picture called as the nature of painting. And this visualizes the different vegetation zones on the cross-section of the mountain, and it relating them to different altitude, temperature, or humidity. And classical biogeography is about the distributions of the species in space and time. But right now, it's not about the species, it's about the ecosystem function through the photosynthesis. And this is, so the critical question is, how can we understand the future forest response to the climate change using the biogeography? And here is the very first work from our lab. It used the remotely sensed vegetation index to detect the forest response to the drought. And this shows the forest tend to show a positive response to the drought and indicate that the intact Amazon forest may be more resilient than people assume, at least in responding to the short-term climate anomalies. After 1 year, there is another science paper coming out. but intriguingly, they report totally opposite results from the rainfall network field sites. And they reported increase in tree mortality and increase in biomass loss. And this indicates the Amazon forest appear more vulnerable to the moisture stress, with large potential for the carbon loss to the climate change. So why were such different observations results from the remote sensing and the field work? And can we reconcile these observations? Here I look at, so to solve this, to address this question, I look at the drought region for the 3 once in a century droughts in the Amazon basin in 2005, 10, 15, and 16 El Nino drought. And here, the more brown shows more water deficit, and the drought region is defined by the maximum cumulative water deficit. It is calculated by when the maximum cumulative water deficit is more than 1 standard deviation below the mean. That's called the drought. And based on the drought region, I calculate their forest drought response calculated by the enhanced vegetation index, which is measuring the canopy greenness as an index of the photosynthetic capacity of the forest. And the green shows positive response to the drought, and the brown shows negative response. And intriguingly, this shows the 2005 drought overall show positive response to the drought, while the 2010 and 15 El Nino drought, the forest show negative response. Why do some areas or times exhibit resilience through positive green up, while others show more vulnerable through brown down or increased mortality? Here, the resilience is defined as how well the forest can sustain or increase the photosynthetic function to respond to the drought. And first, I introduce the local hydrological gradient hypothesis here, which is about the water depth indicate the accessibility of water to trees. And this figure illustrates the mechanism. For example, during the non-drought situation, the water table is shown as this blue line here, and the roots of the trees are submerged underwater in the anoxic environment. In this case, the root will be the respiration of the roots will be limited to the air, to the oxygen, and the growth will be also limited under this situation. While during the drought situation, when the water table decreases, that means the water recedes, but it did not really go away. In this case, the trees still have good access to the groundwater, but at the same time, they could have better access to the air, to the oxygen. And in this case, their growth can be relieved by the drought. So if this is true, I would, so this is for the shallow water table forest scenarios. But for the deep water table forest, they tend to always have a harder access to the water because they have longer distance to the water table. So if this is true, I would predict the shallow water table would have higher response than the deep water table forest. That is, the forest photosynthetic response decreases as the water depth increases. So this is called, is there another side of drought hypothesis where there is too much water normally that can be relieved by the drought? And I first tested this hypothesis. I will briefly explain the results here. So this shows the panel B here is showing the forest photosynthetic response, and the panel C is the spatial distribution of water depth. And the green positive response is well aligned with the shallow water table here, while the brown, the negative response, is aligned well with the deep water tables. And quantitatively, I calculated their response as versus the water depth, and this shows the forest response declines as the water table depth increases. So this confirmed the hypothesis that I just explained in the previous slides. And is this true for the other two droughts? Because I only just explained the 2005 drought. And then because the 2005 drought is mainly located in the southern region of the Amazon, so I selected the similar region to test this hypothesis for the other two droughts. And then I observed consistent declines dependence on the water depth. So this confirmed the hypothesis about the water depth so all these results is from the remote sensing perspective. And this got confirmed from the field measurements. The ground measurements is the above ground biomass mortality rates, and the mortality increases as the water depth as the water table increases. So this explains why the remote sensing results show positive response while the field network results show negative response. If you look at the panel E here, this is because the field size, the sampling effort of the field size were biased towards to the deep water table. However, the shallow water table forest that accounting for the 30 to 40% of the whole Amazon basin, they were under sampling, they were under average sampling effort, and this biased sampling effort explain why the positive response from the remote sensing while the negative response from the field size. So I further look at the different mean drought response across the different years. Why are the drought response are so different? And so I look at the interaction between the climates and the water depth. And this shows the shallow water table forest is mostly sensitive to the extra sunlight. This means the shallow water table can be more stimulated by the extra sunlight to produce higher photosynthesis. But this positive response and positive relationship can be suppressed by the long drought. And in the panel C here, as the drought lasting longer and the positive response reverts to the negative. And that's why the 2005, 10, and 15 droughts show different mean response here. And because I only look at the Southern Amazon, so I want to understand, is this also true for the region outside of the Southern Amazon in the Guiana Shield and the Everett Amazon? They are both in the northern part of the Amazon basin. So I tested this hypothesis in these two regions, but I find there is a totally different trend from the regions outside of the Southern Amazon. So it seems that I got so this very contrasting results got me stuck for a little while because the patterns outside of the South Amazon seemed not supported by my the water depth hypothesis. So I wonder what's going on and why it could not really explain the spatial heterogeneity. And based on the resource theory about the competition and the resource partitioning, I also look at the soil fertility hypothesis and the trait hypothesis. And for example, the soil fertility hypothesis states the soil the forest in fertile soils, they tend their growth and the turnover rates is high. They tend to invest less in the drought resistance because they grow fast and they invest less in their drought resistant traits to adapt to the drought. And in this case, they will show poorer drought performance during the drought. And the root depth hypothesis explains when the drought tend to have taller heights with deep roots, they could have better access to the water in this case, and they tend to show better performance during the drought. Or they have higher tolerance traits like higher embolism resistance or dense wood density. and they will because they will have higher embolism resistance, and they tend to be more resilient during the drought because they tolerate higher lower water potential during the drought. And briefly to say, the first hypothesis and the third hypothesis is try to mimic the proximity of water to trees and the trees to water. And the soil fertility is like a mediator to influence the both processes. So I incorporate the water depth, soil fertility, and the tree height together into a nonlinear model, which is called the GAN, which allows the nonlinear interaction fit for the model. And because the soil fertility, water depth, and the tree height, they compose the different forest ecosystems. That's why I call them as ecotope. And for each factor, I call them as ecotope factors. And incorporate the ecotope factors with the climate together to see if the model is doing a better predictive power. And the results shows the ecotope are important in structuring the forest drought response. First, because it increased the R square from 0.25 to 0.37 when the model includes the ecotope. And second, the model reveals different mechanisms, different green up or brown down mechanisms in different ecotopes. So for example, I'll briefly explain this example. For example, in the Rio Negro region and the Apama region, they both show greeny positive response during the drought, but they have different mechanisms. If you look at the interaction effect between the tree height and the water depth, they are located in the region in the very opposite, in a very distant location in this map, where the Rio Negro region is benefited from the shallow water table, but with a shorter forest, because the shallow water table would allow them have easier access to the water. While the Apama region, they tend, even though they are over the deep water table, but they have tall forest. The tall forest would have assumedly deep roots, and the deep roots would enable them to have easier access to the water simultaneously. So the model reveals different green up mechanisms in different forest ecotopes. And so based on this, because the region that I've look in the Amazon basin, they have different characteristics in terms of water depth, soil fertility, and tree height. I use the ecotope factors to estimate the behaviors in each region and to see their prediction, if the prediction aligns well with the observation. So here, the shaded area, the red, blue, and the green indicate the prediction by the model, characterized by the ecotope factors. And the solid diamond here is the observation for each region. And this shows the prediction aligns very well with the observations. And the distinct validated prediction for the three regions reveals a biogeography of the forest drought response. So based on the model, I used the ecotope factors to calculate a biogeography of Amazon forest resilience and the vulnerability to the drought, as indicated by the panel A here. So the more greeny shows more resilient and the more red shows more vulnerable. And based on this, I also calculate the distribution of different ecotope strategies, either by tall forest, infertile soils, or shallow water tables. As you may see here, the white areas here indicate any protective power either by tall forest, infertile soils, or shallow water tables. So this means that they tend to be very vulnerable. And intriguingly, the white area is matching well with the red vulnerable region in panel A here. So this indicates the resilience map works well with the different ecotope strategies. And to quantify the ecotope strategies resilience, I calculate the distribution of the resilience based on their different ecotope strategies. And this shows the most resilient forest type are those with in low soil fertility, either in combination with shallow water tables or with deep-rooted forest. And for the more broad implication, the red vulnerable region is actually here substantially overlaid with the arc of deforestation region, which is the largest deforested area in Brazil, hugely impacted by the human activities. And this region is also situated under the prevailing winds that bring the most Amazonian air to the south with high risk to maintaining the evapotranspiration that feeds the atmospheric rivers to sustain the South America breadbasket in the agriculture. So this means that those vulnerable forests is actually have huge impact on the grand hydroclimates. If those vulnerable forests were really damaged under the climate change, it's not just affect the broad scale Amazon forest, but it also affect the broad scale of the agricultural region just below the Amazon forest in the south part of the South America. So taken together, this story indicate the hydrological environment structure the forest response. The shallow water table can persist or increase the function during the drought, with a contrast to the deep water table forest. At the same time, the ecotope matters. Both the soil fertility and the tree height, they will affect the sensitivity of the water depth to the drought response. So this is the brief story that I just published in Nature. And this whole process I was working for the past 6 years. It's a very hard and a long process for me. And I do have a lot of complicated journey of my feeling and my heart in the past 6 years, especially for the past 2.5 years. So I briefly summarize the 6 questions here for how I get here. But there's still a long way for me to go in the future. But right now I just had a very brief summary. So what is your motivation for your study, for your when you study science, when you study different topics? It's about your curiosity or tasks. For me, take myself as an example, because my background is remote sensing and the geographic information system. So I learned a lot of technical skills and the coding skills when I was in undergraduate and the master's. And I during at that time, I always think that all those things are too technical for me, even though they are very hard and very challenging. But at the same time, I gradually realized that I'm more intrigued by the science is more driven by why. Like when you study the technical questions, it's more about what this is and how to improve the accuracy. But I got more intrigued by the scientific driven questions, starting with why this happened and why this go in this way. So I was determined to change my major. So I applied for my current department is the ecology and evolutionary biology. So I totally changed my major from the remote sensing to the evolution biology and ecology, which involves a lot of theory about ecology, also including the evolution. And here I find that my technique has a very wide applications, but I'm just like a fish in the ocean to absorb different theory from the ecology. And especially I appreciate my professors. They inspire me because they told me there is no stupid questions. It's all about your curiosity and it's all about your knowledge gap and how you figured out what is the knowledge gap. So I totally inspired by my advisor, by my professors in my department. So the curiosity is very important, and you keep that passion is very important. I think that's kind of the motivation I can insist 6 years to stick to one question in my whole PhD. And the second question is, how important is your topic? I think this is super important, but at the same time, it's important, but it's not that important, because if you are totally just focusing on finding what is important to find the right topic, and you will spend so much time just wiggling and thinking and feel confusing. And like I ask my advisor and ask my my professors, and they told me is hot topic is always important, but the more important is to build your broad picture of the whole of ecology of your field, and then you stick to the broad hot topic. But there are so many topics in the divisions, and you can always find the knowledge gap. But so when you get confused, you don't forget your initial goal is to reveal the unknowns, is to advance the knowledge that people don't know. And for example, to me, like there is no new questions in my field in ecology. Everything you study is actually from your textbook, is from your classic theories. I feel those most, I mean, the previous scientists, they are great and they are gorgeous and they are brilliant. They've already proposed important questions in our field. So I think what I did is just to find the gap knowledge, because, for example, they may propose the ideas or the theory based on the dynamic models, or based on their on the theory based on their differential equations, or based on their field size. But how about, but there in the ecosystem is super complex. There is no single rules that controlling everything. So when you want to understand the complexity of the ecosystem, you want to zoom in, because you want to grab the main rules, the main phenomena, the main patterns. But at the same time, you want to zoom out, because you want to have a have a broad understanding, comprehensive understanding for the whole ecosystem. So I think once you are able to zoom in and zoom out, and once you know what is the fundamental questions in your field, and you were able to find where is the gap knowledge to advance your science, your studies. And the third one is, I think I benefited a lot from this, is don't be discouraged if the results are unexpected. For example, from my undergraduate and master experience, I always try to propose a hypothesis and try to find my results fit in my hypothesis. But in this study, like for example, I use the other side drought hypothesis, the water depth, and it is working well for the South Amazon, but it does not really work for the northern part of the Amazon. At that time, I was kind of like get stuck. I was wondering, oh, is that because it is real, or is that because my results were wrong? And I keep validate my results again and again, and I realize the results what I find is true, but at the same time, it does not fit my hypothesis. But I think my advisor told me it's okay if the results is unexpected, but the more important thing is to understand why it happened in this way. And this also indicated maybe there is a big chance for you to find something new, because it is out of your expectation. And this also means that it largely fits in your discrepancy of the knowledge that you already have. But more important is you have to be careful about the results, and you have to be careful about how to incorporate the results in the solid framework. And the fourth is to think broadly and analyze in depth. I think this is like very consistent to what I just explained, the zoom in and zoom out. And the fifth is writing is super important. And I was suffering from the writing during my master's and my PhD. My advisor always told me, you have to improve your writing, you have to improve it. And I do benefit a lot from his advising, and he keep revising my manuscript. And but the key thing that he told me is, first, you have to have your figures, you have to have the structure of your stories, and then you have to, based on the figures, and then you draft your 5 key paragraph. There is a method, it's a writing method called 5 key paragraphs method, and you can search online, and they will briefly explain how you structure the keys, your key story of your study. So it's not about more complex the better, or more longer the better. It's more about your core idea of the story, how you structure it. And the sixth one is like how you keep resilient and insistent. Is because you have to believe there is always room for you to improve it. For example, I got a lot of challenges during my revision process. I have 5 reviewers, and they have very in-depth and critical questions for me to answer. Even though when I submitted my paper, I believe it's the best one that I can get. But after I received their comments from the reviews, then I realized, okay, I just need to stick to it and keep improve it. And then I realized, okay, they help me to realize there is always more room, and I can always challenge myself to make it better. And so here is a very intriguing video to explain the process. Oh, sorry. So yeah, just stay resilient and be insistent. Yes.